Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for our Transbians panel. My name is Talana Monique Timo. I use pronouns she, they, and I am the new manager at the youth services here at the New Haven Pride Center. Before we begin, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge the land on which we are hosting this event. The New Haven Pride Center was founded and operates on traditional lands of the Mohegan, Massatucket Pequot, Eastern Pequot, the Sawtucket, Golden Hill Pawtucket, and Niantic and the Quinnipiac peoples. Please take a moment to acknowledge and honor the Native people whose lands you occupy and the history of the place you're in. To learn more about Native lands, please visit native/land.ca. Today's event is part of Pride New Haven. Pride New Haven runs through the end of this week. With over 25 events, there is something for everyone. Visit newhavenpridecenter.org to get all of the information about this year's programming. We would like to thank all of the sponsors of Pride New Haven, which include Gotham City Cafe, Healthcare Advocates International, Black Rock Social House, Partners Cafe, Circle Care Center, the Community Foundation of Greater New Haven, the City of New Haven, and the State of Connecticut. Today's program is Transbians. Today's program is supported by specifically CT Humanities, Anchor Health, and Planned Parenthood. And now I would like to pass it to Kaylee to get the program started.
Thank you, Timo. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Carly Webb. My pronouns are she, her, and I am pleased to be moderating this special event today. And before I begin also, everyone, happy Pride. And I look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Pride returns to the New Haven Green. But this afternoon, we are going to have an interesting examination with some opinions that are going to be very enlightening, and we hope to have an excellent program today. Our program centers around 4 trans women in our community. We're all trans, we're all women, and we all identify as Transfemme lesbians. Now, this particular demographic, this group, if you will, is one that people talk about, but some of them hear from. Well, this afternoon, we've decided that we're going to take the microphone and let's talk. But enough about me yapping. Let's meet our panel. And you know what? I don't need to introduce them. They can introduce themselves. Sisters, welcome to the stage.
Hi there.
Hi, everyone.
Hey.
Hello, everyone. Adina, you first.
So my name is Adina Kaplan-Stone. My pronouns are she, her. I am a full-time student at the age of 40, married, and my focus is on homeless trans youth, incarcerated trans adults, with kind of a edge towards how language affects marginalized communities.
Well, don't all go at once. Don't make me pick
I'll
someone.
jump in. My name's Kai Van Black, she, her pronouns. I'm the program and sponsorship manager at Riot, Rhode Island, a youth music education organization operating out of Providence, Rhode Island. And I play guitar in the bands Trophy Hunt and Trinket. And most of my experience is around DIY punk and the intersection of queerness with that. So thank you for having me.
Welcome. Azula, your turn.
Yes, and I am Azula Luz. I use she, her pronouns. I am an intern at the New Haven Pride Center helping throw Pride Fest this year. And in addition to that, I am a full-time student at Southern Connecticut State University in the art department, focusing on printmaking mostly.
Okay, so we've got different age groups, we've got different backgrounds, we've got different professions, and we've got a musician, which means, and not only that, a punk musician, which means it's already, we're already speaking pretty much the same language here. Well, first, what does being trans and being lesbian mean to you?
I'll start. I think that being trans is like such a big question. I feel like I got asked it a lot, especially early in transition. Like, what does that mean? And for me, it's just the easiest term to use to identify how I feel. I think that there's no perfect term for who I am or really who anybody is, but we all kind of stuff ourselves into boxes, and the trans box fits for me. But with being a lesbian, I think that being a lesbian is about not only who and how we love, but like really how we move through the world. I find that my being, since I've come out as a trans woman and as a trans lesbian, has like been so important and amazing, and like led to such growth in myself. And part of what it means to be a lesbian now for me is like helping others find growth and helping myself continue to grow.
I think I'm happy to go next. I think in a lot of ways, like being a trans lesbian feels inevitable to me. Like even before my point of like transitioning and being public with my gender identity, I found myself in community with a lot of cis lesbians actually, and I think that the like kinship I felt around with those people and like the sort of development of my own feminism within that context sort of led to like my deeper understanding of myself and where I fit along like the spectrum of gender identity and sexuality. So yeah, like if anything, like my identity feels like an outgrowth of already being in that community.
Oh, like Azula said, I think that trans and lesbian, it is a complicated interaction, and it shouldn't be a complicated interaction, but we love the idea that gender and sexuality are two different things, but they do influence each other. And I think that complicates a little things for me as a trans woman, at least. But like Kai said, like even when I was young, just add a little levity to it. Like every single girl I ever had a like crush on was like some kind of butch dyke, and it was kind of, you know, like my sexuality, how I articulate my sexuality was easy for me to figure out, but it's complicated to interact with the world with it sometimes. I think the world itself, society itself, complicates who we are. Now,
you know, let's talk about that. Let's get on that a little bit more, because that society unfortunately has all these things with it. There's all these things within. There's the femme-butch continuum. There's all these different intersections, and with that in mind, what you just said, what do you feel that those outside of our identities miss in their inferences about trans women who are lesbians?
Oh, that is so loaded. Oh
Yeah.
So
big one.
I've interacted with people where it just makes sense to them. You know, they're like, oh, you're a woman who likes girls, so you're a lesbian. That makes sense. But I would venture to say every single person in this panel has gotten this question where you get that look of confusion that they're like, but you're trans. Why do you like women? And you have to, we don't have to, but sometimes we choose to go through the whole explaining gender and sexuality are different and blah, blah, blah. But I think there's this tendency to want to, within the queer community, but especially without, just to like strictly delineate the confines of an identity. And the reality is that's all a little bit blurry. And I think that part of the tension is people and even ourselves wanting to fit inside of these confines when the walls are actually very blurry.
Yeah, I can run with you on that, because in a lot of ways I call it the human Microsoft blue screen of death. You know, when people get that idea, like like, for example, when I recently I had this discussion with family I came out to, and they were like, so do you have a boyfriend? I'm like, no, I have a girlfriend. I'm a lesbian. Or as I told my cousins while sipping wine, I'm Dyke Almighty, Dyke Everlasting. And they all literally, their eyes glaze over like, you're what? And you get that Microsoft blue screen of death moment. And within that, how do you navigate that with those who may not get it?
It's so dependent on the person and the situation. I find that trying to explain my sexual orientation to people whose concept of transness is very confined and limited is just like impossible and not worth the effort. Because for so many people, like the first reaction is like, well, then why would you transition? Why go through all of this work if you are like just gonna still like girls? And it's like, I don't know, very silly and heteronormative. But I find that when there are people who feel safe to like talk about it with, a lot of times I kind of push the like, well, you know, there are so many different types of women and there are so many different types of men that we see as acceptable in today's society. And the problem is that with trans women, we are seen kind of in one light. I think that like a few years ago with Laverne Cox in Orange is the New Black, there was like a big, at least for me, a lot of people who like kind of assumed that's what all trans women were like. And, you know, it's not. And we come in like all shapes and flavors too, you know?
No.
Yeah, I think on the rare occasion that I mean, I count myself very blessed to mostly not share space with queer people. Like, I live in a feminist arts with people who are not queer, rather. I live in a feminist arts collective. My job like entirely like targets like queer kids for like our programming, and like Providence. I moved from Brooklyn to Providence, and they're both like really gay and trans meccas. But I think trying to explain like and sort of disconnect the like historical category of trans women as like almost like a subset of gay men is like a really difficult thing when you meet people with like I guess like a less initiated perspective on queerness and like what modern conceptions of like queerness are. And I guess like I mostly try not to explain myself. Like I think that sort of archetype doesn't apply to me is fairly self-evident. And I'd like to think that people get it. And if they don't, I like mostly don't follow up, you know, like, yeah, like I think I have the luxury of choosing my company at this point in my life. I'm also like, I'm in my 30s. I didn't mention that earlier. So like, I think I've become more discriminating in that way, you know?
Now, that's what Kai, I want to get a follow up with you on that. Now, how has orientation influenced your journey, if it has? And everyone can jump in on this too.
You mean like sexual orientation?
Yes.
Well, I mean, unfortunately, because of like what I'm talking about like a historical conception of trans women as a subset of gay men, I think my sort of ability to identify transness with myself within myself and queerness within myself was sort of stunted when I was in high school, because I kind of came to the determination of like, well, I spend a lot of time thinking about being a woman and seem to find myself in relationships with like ostensibly gay women fairly often and like very comfortable in those spaces. And I seem to be kind of inadequate at performing masculinity or straightness or whatever the like sociological category du jour is. But I don't like men, so that must not be me. And like, you know, that sounds kind of like funny in the enlightened age we're in, but like I think it was very applicable when I was coming of age, where like I knew some girls that were trans, even in like the, you know, subset of like the punk scene I occupied, but they were all interested in men. And so like I just didn't feel like I don't know, I sort of like explained it away, you know, in a weird way. So in terms of like my journey of self-discovery, I felt it to be, at least at the initiating point, an impediment, but I feel more and more empowered by it the older I get, and the more sort of I see myself as sort of part of a history, you know, and like feeling like my own place in that and my own historicity and the historicity of like trans lesbians as a category. Like that a lot of those narratives I think are not like entry level and require quite a bit of digging, but finding them has been really gratifying. Yeah.
Now, that's one thing I've noticed in this group. We've got a 20-something, a 30-something, a 40-something, and a 50-something. So we've got a good spread of generations here. Anyone have anything to add to that? Because
I
that's
wanted to piggyback on something Kai said, because it really resonated with me when you said uncoupling from the historical conception of transness, but also the historical conception of any sexual identity or gender identity. That was incredibly difficult for me as a kid, because I do define myself as a lesbian. I define myself as a dyke. I view it as a way that, like Azula said, moving through the world, a refusal. But I wouldn't say, like I was saying before, I wouldn't say that it's like this strictly delineated thing. And I have been turned on by a wide variety of bodies through my life. And as a young kid, because I knew who I was at a very young age, I'm like, I come from an era where maybe there wasn't the same language we have now, the same understanding, the same kind of representation. And there was this historical conception of what transness is supposed to be, but there was also this history that was completely missing. There was this history I didn't know. And I'm sitting there looking in the mirror like, all right, I'm pretty sure I'm a girl, but like, I have a crush on that girl over there, and everything around me, and myself included, is telling me that that's wrong. And it just created this very complicated tangle that I struggled with for a long time. And I tell people I went through a large majority of my life that would be basically like the trans version of comp het, where I was dating men not because I was attracted to men, but because I would never be seen as a woman, this pre-transition, by a woman as another woman, so I could approximate that kind of interaction with them. And it just was like this like huge hairy knot that like I still kind of like have to like sit to like take time with, and kind of like piece together my own historicity and what my sexuality means in the context of my transness.
I'm wondering, what were some of the influences that kind of, in effect, if they led you in that direction, that led you to come into your identity? And
identity as trans, or identity as lesbian?
No, first your identity as being the person that you are now, as being all the things that you are now. What were some of the influences that got you there?
I mean, like Kai, I was in I was in punk and art communities, so like I would see like, okay, just because the TV is telling me that like trans women are jokes or stereotypes or serial killers or whatever, like I'm seeing people who kind of are like me, and you know, it's kind of like a choose your own adventure that you just kind of like start kind of, you're like, yeah, I'm going to try this, see what feels right.
See, that's hearing both of your stories interesting, because I came from a somewhat of an opposite direction, as like like Adina, like you were talking about. It's like at times it's like, okay, I'm not going to be seen this way, so I have to portray in a certain way for myself to see it that way. And I look at my own history, and it was the exact opposite. I was trying to skew. I was trying to be. I was overcompensating the opposite direction, because whatever was going on in my head, I didn't want to deal with it. And it was one of those things where I didn't want to deal with it, because at the time you're saying how we didn't have the exact language. When I was like in those formative, say, high school years, there was none. There literally was no language for this. I mean, we were still trying to get to G and L. We were trying to figure that out, and we equated at that time G and L with AIDS. So that was one hurdle to climb before we had to climb a few hurdles before we could get to the hurdle that we had to deal with. Now, with that in mind, I'm just wondering, Azula, what was it like for you? Matt, I've asked the question for other two panelists. I want to ask you as well. What were some of the influences that led you to come into your identity and your orientation?
So growing up, I was always kind of seen as, the term that was often thrown at me in high school and growing up was metrosexual, which is so funny.
Yeah.
You know,
Metro.
So my older brother is gay, and so in comparison to him, I was always seen as much less flamboyant and like kind of just like weirder in this, like people couldn't really pin me down, which led to a lot of
Which led to Wi-Fi confusion.
Oh, no.
confusion for me, you know. And so I like kind of grew up in this space of feeling like everyone was kind of aware that I wasn't the stereotypical like straight boy, but also was very much not that, not like a gay man, and in anybody's eyes. And that led to a lot of confusion for me for many years, where I think I wouldn't believe that I could be anything other than just like kind of a weird straight boy who just kind of wanted to be a girl sometimes, you know, like it was, I played a lot of mind games on myself. And it wasn't until I got out of college and kind of like did the ringer with addictions that I was like, oh, yeah, I am not a boy. And I think that my journey in sobriety has really influenced my ability to see myself for who I am, because I just had to do so much reckoning with like shit I've done and people I've hurt and the ways that I've been hurt. And in not doing that work, I came across like, oh, wow, a lot of this hurt comes from me feeling out of my body and not myself, you know?
Quickly, lightning round. If you had to give yourself a one sentence or less label for the type of lesbian you are, what would it be? Azula, you first. Go.
Drama queen. I don't know.
Kai, go.
Emotional crash test dummy.
Emotional crash test dummy. Okay, I need a quick explanation on that one.
I'm just down to clown when I shouldn't be. You know?
Okay, Dean, go.
A big, loud femme dyke.
Me, I might as well just join in on this too. Me, sport femme lesbian. Hard as nails on the field, princess away from it. And actually, that word's in my head, and I'm thinking from the, in one way or another, we talk about, because when we were initially looking at this thing, when we were initially looking at this panel, we were talking about Transfemme lesbians especially, and I want to talk about that intersection of being lesbian, being trans, being femme. Why do some within our own community feel such awkwardness about that intersection?
I would love to touch on this one because this is kind of a lot of the focus of like what I talk about when I'm talking about worlding and creating things with language. I think that, to kind of touch first, I think a lot of what we think of when we think of identity, we think of normalcy, kind of can be traced back to colonization and how ideas of normal were kind of formed then. And I think where a lot of the unease comes from is in something that I hold very dearly, something that I find kind of, for better or worse, intrinsic to transness, which is destabilization. We kind of, in almost in a utopian way, we throw into upheaval these, like I was saying before, these strictly delineated, kind of boxed in areas of identity. And we're all guilty of kind of latching on to things in life. We latch on to identities, we latch on to who we are, what we are. And when somebody is walking around being the living embodiment of that upheaval, it makes sense. Like, it makes sense to me that they have discomfort with it. But what I would always love to say in response to that is that this destabilization that we represent, it doesn't harm you. It's a gift. It's liberation. It's transness as liberatory praxis. We are that freedom that everybody can play in.
I wonder, quick follow up. Where did you find that freedom? When did you first realize that, like, I can be that big, loud femme dyke, and I can be free about it?
I don't know that it was a moment. I think it was kind of a natural progression. It was me kind of taking all these bits and pieces of every single identity that I've dipped my toes in and saying, like, I don't have to be any of those one things. I could just be. I could just be comfortable in my discomfort.
Kai, you had something to add just a second ago.
Oh yeah, I think in particular for transgender lesbians, like I said, is already within straight cis hegemony, right? There is a conception of trans women as having a niche, even though it is a deeply ghettoized one, and it's within gay culture, gay men's culture, right? And so I think being trans and not occupying that niche sort of is disruptive to that hegemony in that because we're operating so outside of like a historically sanctioned social niche, right? There's no real opportunity for like, frankly, straight cis people to monetize and sell our experiences back to us. So I think there's a lot of sort of frustration about, like, the inability to mediate our existence to us, and I think that's threatening on a lot of levels.
In what way is it? Do you think it's threatening? If you had to pick a key point of where this is threatening to the order, where would you put it?
It's just on the frontier of like people's ability to understand it, and that's not going to last forever. Of course, like there'll be a new thing, but like right now, I think we're in the crosshairs. Like, like it's not even an idle thought. Like the idea of like, oh, trans lesbians being scapegoated for like lesbian bars closing during the pandemic, as though there aren't like some mitigating economic factors driving that process. Like,
for myself, I've never understood that. I've never understood. Don't blame me. I want to come in and spend money.
Right. Like if you're coming in and buying drinks at a bar, well, there's nothing to understand there. It's a stupid idea, but people.
I'm in total agreement. Azula, you were about to perk in with something.
Yeah, I was just. I think that the intersection of the three, being femme and trans and lesbian, can be so daunting and confusing, because it feels like three different performances sometimes that I have to do that feel radically separated in my own head, but in everybody else's they kind of lump together. But it's really like, sometimes I think I just want to put commas in between trans, femme, and lesbian because
Well, walk
they
me
are.
through it. Azula, walk me through that.
Well,
I mean, three different ones?
yeah, because I just think by lumping them all together, my experience with being a lesbian and my experience with being trans are vastly different. And then throwing in femininity, it feels like so much to try and like parse through and work through. Whereas when I break it down, I'm like, oh yeah, this all makes sense. But especially with people who are like when I was first coming to terms with my gender and like kind of struggling with the idea of being a femme, trans, lesbian. Yeah, breaking it down made it just much easier to swallow, if you will.
Quick lightning round for everybody. On a scale of 1 to 10, 1 is complete tepidness, 10 metaphysical certitude. Where were you? What was the level of struggle that you had at the beginning when you realized, oh my God, I might be trans. Oh my God, I might be a woman. Where was it? Where was that level of struggle? Scale of 1 to 10. Then you first.
Are we saying 10 the hardest, 10 most
Yeah,
difficult?
10 means one means okay, I'm trans, whatever. 10 is oh my God, what is wrong?
It was like a million. I was like 11 years old growing up in Bridgeport in the 80s. It was a lot.
Oh my God, I can run with that assessment. Being young in the 80s and trying to figure it out. Kai, you're up.
I mean, ditto. I think it was cataclysmically destructive to the degree that I repressed entirely for a decade. Like I was already like quote unquote cross dressing at age 12, and like then that disappeared for a long interval. Like I really tried my damnedest to being a straight boy.
Zula, how about you?
I would agree. I would put it up there. Maybe like at least an 11. It definitely. It was one of those things that I actively fought for many years, despite being like perfectly aware. And looking back at some journals from when I was a teenager, I'm like, oh God, this is. I knew, but I just didn't want to commit.
I can run with all of that. Mine, scale of 1 to 10, I say about 25, 30, and rising.
Unmitigated horror.
Yeah. Kai, I want to piggyback quickly to something you said. You was like, you're trying I'm just waiting for everybody. What at that time when you were like trying to struggle at that point? And Kai, you said that you're trying to be as straight boy as possible. What are some of the ways that manifests itself? And how did you cope? And in a sense, how did that affect how did those thoughts, those memories, those experiences affect how you see yourself now in both your identity and your orientation?
I mean, it wasn't a happy time. I was like deeply suicidal and dysfunctional. Like I don't, as much as I again like really tried to get with the program. I think if I had repressed and tried to live that life in the long term, I don't think I'd be talking to you here today. Like I think that's just the reality of it. Like I fully like wasn't gonna make it. And the extent to which like pursuing transition not I mean didn't fix my problems completely, but immediately like assuaged like a ton of like really debilitating mental illness, like really proved that to me. I was like, oh yeah, like this was the thing. Like the moment I started taking hormones, like the day I took my first dose of estradiol, I was like, oh wow, like I feel happier than I've ever felt in my life. And like obviously like it's not doing shit at that point, right? Like it's just making an affirming decision for yourself. Like yeah. I don't know. Like yeah, I don't think it was a real possibility for me to like stay in the closet or whatever. Like I don't think I could have lived my life that way.
One thing, you know what? We're going to switch this up a little bit. We're going to switch this a little bit up. Somebody here, if there's a question or something that you want to talk about, and that includes everybody watching, now's the time. We're going to take a little step back. I'm going to take a little step back from the moderator role for a minute. And if any of the panelists or anybody watching wants to throw one out there, throw a topic out there, how about it?
I got one.
All right.
Who's like your root in terms of like lesbian identity and your conception of lesbian identity? Like, and I'll answer it. Like for me, it's Tegan and Sarah. Like I was reasonably obsessed with.
Are you walking with the ghost? Wow, Tegan and Sarah. That's digging some 90s right there.
Huh. I think that my root would be the Hex Girls from a Scooby-Doo special. It was the Scooby-Doo band that sang I'm Gonna Put a Spell on You in this Halloween one where they were like at the volcano, something concert volcano, foiled some mystery. But those Hex Girls, they were an awakening for young Azula.
Oh, for me? Oh.
Mm-hmm.
Oh. I would say it's like two things. It's one, anybody would know. It's my first job. It was a girl that used to come in there, and she was very blatantly butch lesbian. But I'm just like, hi, I think I like you, but like, how do I like you? Like, and then on the opposite side of it, kind of somebody people might know. I think maybe the older people might know. The third member of SWV, the short one.
Oh, Left Eye.
No, not TLC. SWV.
Okay. Oh, I know you're talking about that. Okay, wait a minute.
And to this day, anybody who knows my wife, like, I still like the short one.
I'm not getting away without an answer, right? I'm not. Kai, what was the question? Make sure
Who's your root, like your original, like sort of idol or totem in terms of your conception of lesbian identity?
Oh God! See, that's
like,
a hard
model.
My model is real. I mean, honestly, my model is an amalgamation of a lot of athletes I've covered in my journalism career, because that was my. Okay, I'm gonna give a little piece of Carly history back in the 1990s. Does anybody remember what a dyke tech was? Because I was one pre-transition. I will own that.
Tell me about that.
It's like it. Let me just put it this way: it's a male version. At the time, it was a perceived male version of something, of a term we can't use now, but I think you get the idea. But the point is, it was that one perceived dude, and all your friends were lesbians, and that was me growing up, especially in sports journalism, because you cover enough women's sports, you're going to get to know some people.
I see what.
I was the person.
Yeah, I see what you're doing.
I was the person who they would call and be like, "Hey, it's WNBA night at the party coming out." Cool.
Maybe I'm ignorant. Are we not allowed to talk about hags anymore? Like,
I'm not sure. Hey, I want the Pride Center to keep tapping me to moderate this stuff. I'm going to be 2022 as I possibly can.
You might know something down on there.
No, but the thing was that was in a lot of ways my introduction into the community, but in some ways my introduction in a lot of ways my profession became also my introduction into kind of in some ways whacking me upside the head and realizing that, hey, maybe you aren't as straight as you thought you were, or maybe you aren't as quote unquote male as you perceive yourself to be. Like kind of like Azula, what you were talking about. I went through that, but not so much as a teenager, but as a 20 and a 30 something. And
I really relate to that. That's about my timeline as well.
and one of the things that got me, not so much a lesbian totem, but just a totem towards my transition was I I would be covering like a high school or college. For example, covering stuff like college softball and college volleyball, and just seeing just the togetherness and the upbeat and the up tempo and the way that women especially socialize in a locker room and among a team. I found myself feeling jealous, and for a long time I didn't know why. I was jealous and didn't know why. Then once I started coming into my own and doing my own investigation, I realized why I felt the way I did, because I wish I could have that experience. I wish I could have had that experience at the time, for example, when I was playing sports. And the more that hit me and the more that peaked at me, the more I realized that no, this isn't just something you wish for, this is something you are. And you need to investigate it. So in a sense, that's where my totems were. Now, if I had to pick a personal totem, gee, that's a rough one. That's a rough one, because we could go to a lot. Okay, I'll say if I had to pick a personal totem, Diana Taurasi would probably be it.
Love it.
But I mean, one thing within that, because one thing we talked about a great deal is experiences. And that's one thing my personal feeling is that being transgender women, we don't talk amongst ourselves enough about these things, to me. And I want to ask all of you, where do you feel you are in regard to relationship with other transgender women? Be they straight, be they platonic relationships, be they romantic relationships, sexual relationships, and with an eye towards a question of where can we do better by each other?
Oh, I love that question. I love it, because I think that kind of modern articulations of transness, they have a little bit of difficulty sitting with the messiness that is transness. And how that kind of plays out is whereas in like the 90s, early 2000s, if you were trans and you knew another trans person, it didn't matter what they were into, what they did, that was your friend, that was your people. Now it's like it's very segmented, and even I find myself uncomfortable with certain sections of trans women in particular. I don't really feel the need to kind of like point that out. I don't think that is useful or even kind, but I personally, I could talk about who I have always gravitated towards. I personally have a great connection with a lot of trans women, and it's mostly either current or former trans sex workers. It's something that I did in times in my life, and it's a way of being in the world. It's a way of carrying yourself. It is definitely an articulation of transness that kind of I always gravitate towards. But I just, before we move on to everybody else, I just want to like, I wish that us as a community, we could sit with that messiness a little bit more. We could, Azula, you said something before when you brought up cross-dressing. And, when you look at trans history, when you go through the archive, you look at old documentaries, you see this very blurry line between, I think a great example of what I'm trying to say, like somebody like Miss Major. Throughout her life, she has identified as a gay man, a trans woman, transsexual, transvestite. She changed her gender marker on her ID to woman, and then changed it back. And like this idea that like transness is supposed to be this thing, that this is what a transgender woman is it's historically incorrect, but also on like a personal level. Like our lives they're blurry and they're messy, and we should really I think we'll find our freedom, we'll find our liberation in kind of sitting with that, and having a conversation with the person who identifies as a cross-dresser, having a conversation with the person who identifies as the dreaded SH word. You know what I'm saying? Let's sit with that. That's part of who we are.
I like that you put that messiness. I like that you put that messiness, because again, I'll give a Carly come to Jesus moment. I lived that messiness for years, and when we're just trying to figure it all out. So I'm with you on that. Anyone else? I mean, where can we as a community just do better in regards to how we see each other, in addition to how we see ourselves?
I mean, I have trouble speaking to it. This feels like obnoxious to say, but I feel incredibly spoiled in my social life in terms of I am just I just have tons of trans women in my life, and I think to my eye a very loving and internet connected community. But I think,
Kai, how did you build that? How did that build?
I think a lot of it comes from gravitating to each other in different contexts, which is the music and art world. A lot of those people are peers, and I think naturally being trans girls in punk, where if we see another one of us, we're okay, we're buds now. That's a micro scene unto itself, and we're all on very friendly terms. I mean, it's a very interconnected sort of scene because there's only so many of us, but I feel very well supported in that regard, and pretty integrated into the broader Providence queer scene. I think everyone hangs out, and just as many trans women as I have in my life, I have non-binary people, and even a contingent of very special cis people I love.
See, that's one thing, you landed in a good spot, because
Providence,
Rhode Island is queer AF. There's no doubt about that.
I think there's a nice balance in that I love existing publicly and don't want to like I said sequester myself in a margin, because I think that's a trap, and I think it's a way to be recaptured by hegemony basically. But I think it's also really important to have quiet and intimate space with other people in your same identity category, so you can have I don't know, we were talking about the unacceptability of certain terms, and there certainly are consensus opinions in queer community about the way trans women relate to other segments of the community that I think need to be able to be discussed in a frank and messy way. And I think having that space for yourself is incredibly important. The space to not be put together and write about everything. And that's where I really derived value is just laying on a friend's bed and talking about the shit you're working through in terms of your own conception of yourself within the queer world. Yeah.
Julie, you just smiled wide at something.
Me?
Yes, you just smiled wide when Kai was saying that.
I agree. I think that there's a lot to be said about having and holding community with other trans women and just trans people in general. I've gotten a lot of and done a lot of work with a lot of non-binary and trans men as well. I really do though what you were saying, Kai, about just having space to just sit on a bed and talk through the shit, because that's where so much of the real radical connection and world building that I like to do happens, is just in these intimate moments that are sometimes shared in passing and sometimes more intentional. And so having the space to be able to kind of cultivate both of those types of connections it's really awesome and important if you can find it. Yeah.
That's one of the reasons why I'm grateful to be moderating this panel, and grateful for the presence of all three of you, because I'm one of those who in a lot of ways at times feels like I'm on the outside looking in. Like, I'm still searching for that. What I talked about earlier, like wanting that sisterhood, and still, and even after well into my transition and well into my process and well into a place where I feel comfortable with being me, it's still very elusive. And it still seems very elusive, and still seems like it still seems a little distant. So hearing you all talk about how you've worked through that, I've taken a lot of notes.
Well, listen, the gratitude's mutual, and also, like, girl, like, come to Providence, we'll get coffee.
You know what? I will take you up on that. If there's a barcade trip involved, absolutely. I got to get my game on a little bit.
There's one right downtown.
I know.
I walked by it last time I was in Providence.
Now,
it's fun.
For all of you, however, and this is something I ask a lot on my podcast, I ask a lot about people, is where do you find your trans joy? And I want to extend that question. Where do you find your sisterhood if you seek it?
I'll start. I find a lot of my trans joy from reading like smutty queer novels. That shit's fun.
Hey, okay, Azula Lou's Smutty Book Club recommendation.
I mean,
what have you got? What you got?
Oh God. Well, I just read Paul Takes the Form of a Mortal Girl, which I thought was really fun. I'm smutty as hell. Yeah, I guess that would be my current recommendation.
You got to put it in the chat.
Okay, I will.
You got to put that in the chat. See?
I also find that like making music and art have been really big sources of finding joy in my transness. I find words to be fun to use but confusing and complicated, and music and visual arts are less complicated in my head, and so it's like easier for me to express. It's also much easier for me to find to find joy and find myself reflected in me in visual arts, especially like weird abstract arts, like this painting behind me, which was painted by this trans woman, Jules Larson, who right before they had a baby, and like I saw myself in it so much before I'd even realized who had painted it, and all of it. So yeah.
You just brought up the name of a dear mentor in my own process. Love you, Jules. And everyone else, where do you find that trans joy? And within that, where do you find your sisterhood?
I mean, it's here. This is it. This is where I find it. Like I've always found it here. Like whether it's just hanging out with like my best friend and just like talking a lot of shit, but then also touching on really big, deeper things, whether it's sitting, I'm like a huge nerd and I like to watch like panel discussions and academic discussions. And I just love seeing I love seeing a trans woman carry herself and talk and be and move through the world. And I see that as a reflection of me, and I see a reflection of me in that. And it's powerful. I find it like Azula said, I find it in art, in poetry, and there it is, like world building, in being with community and doing what we're doing right now. This is it. This is what it's about to me. This is utopia to me.
Kai, how about you?
I mean, I definitely feel it in community with other queer people, and particularly with other trans women. Like being on this panel is a pure joy. I'm really glad to be hearing from all of you, and you all have like such distinct and like articulated conceptions of yourself. Like I feel like growing in conjunction with y'all. But I think for me, trans joy appears most often in moments with myself. Like like by myself. I think I have like a very involved social life, kind of in spite of myself, because I love spending time alone. And but when, you know, before I had transitioned, I think I was someone who experienced like crippling loneliness. And I think a lot of that was just desperately trying to distract myself from a big thing that was killing me. And I like truly, like, in my time when I'm alone, like I miss people sometimes, or like sometimes like I want to go on a date or go out for coffee with a friend, but I don't feel lonely. I don't feel lonely anymore, like almost ever. And like when I notice that difference, like I'm like, oh shit, like I kind of like myself, which is nuts, you know?
Yeah, it's crazy, isn't it?
Yeah, that's when I realized this transition thing was real. When I started realizing that, God dang it, I love me.
When you're sitting on the couch and you're like in like your worst band shirt, just like with holes in it, and you're just like you're just being like that's it.
Because that's funny. That's where I find my trans joy, just in being.
You know,
And
what I
in
told people,
in doing the things I did, but mainly in doing the things I always loved, and now to get to represent, like for example, doing this right now gives me trans joy because this is something I did as a career, and now I get to be me. And now for the first time, I get to represent me authentically doing it. That's a trans joy thing for me.
It does hit different, don't it?
It's a lot different. Everybody, we're getting the 3-minute warning. So exit question. And this is going to be in the form of a completed sentence. Trans lesbians would be stronger if we just did blank.
Oh, that's easy for me. That's easy. If we stopped feeling like we need to give ourselves permission. If we just existed in the space is ours.
Huh.
Trans lesbians would be stronger if we just committed to doing more things together out in the world.
Okay. Trans lesbians would be stronger and better off if we stopped trying to define ourselves like at all. Like I don't think like we need to become understandable or palatable. I think the push for the queer community at large should not be reintegration into like a hierarchical system that oppressed us and forced us into the margin. You know, I think
So,
upend the whole fucking thing.
so in other words, do you be you, do us.
Yeah.
Zilla, how about you?
Yeah, I was gonna say something similar. I feel like we'd be better off if we all just like stopped caring so much about the people we don't care about. You know, like I care about the people who love me and I love back, and I care about their opinions of me, but everyone else, they can kind of suck it, you know?
You know
It's
what?
interesting. It feels like we all basically said the same exact thing. And I love
You know
that.
what? Let's have a little bit of fun to end this though. One word bonus exit question for everybody. If you had to describe the person that you're with, or the person you or the perfect person you or the dream person you want to be with in one word, what would that one word be for her?
Slightly annoying.
You cheated, that's 2, but we'll accept it.
Word.
One word's hard.
I'm just going to say my wife's name, Rebecca.
Aww.
Yeah. You know what? The person I'm with is radiant. She's radiant.
My one word, dorky cute. 2 words into one word can count.
Hyphenated.
Fair enough.
Yeah, I've been it can work. I hope that everyone out there enjoyed this discussion as much as I enjoyed being a moderator, because this is something that, you know what, when they archive this thing, watch it again, because there was a lot that was said, a lot that was heard, and I can tell you, I'll say it right now. I want to do coffee with all of you. I want to get all your contacts when this is over, because this was a time. And to all of you, be together and let's stay together. So thank you all. Azula, Kai, Dina, thank you for being a part of this. And to all of you, thank you for being a part of this. And again, we're stronger together than we are apart. And
This was
everyone,
a
happy
pleasure.
Pride.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Carly.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here.
Yeah, thank you, Carly. Thank you, Siani, for putting this together.
Yeah, Siani, thank you. I look forward to meeting you at Pride tomorrow. And I look forward to seeing all of you at Pride tomorrow. It's been our program for this afternoon. I'm Carly Chardonnay Webb for all of us at the New Haven Pride Center. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. Happy Pride. I'll see you on the green tomorrow.